Welcome back to 101 East. In the studio we have Khairi Jamaluddin, Deputy UMNO Youth Leader, also by the Government Minister, Mohammed Nazri Abdulaziz, and human rights lawyer Malik Imtiaz Sarwar. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Were UMNO to decide to hold a rally in support of the government, would it be banned by the police?
Well, UMNO has held rallies before in the past. Opposition parties have held rallies in the past before. And in particular contexts, in particular settings, they're allowed. But I just want to get back to what Imtiaz said just now. And that's related to how the police viewed this particular demonstration on Saturday. The only other precedent that we had with Bersih was the coalition that had the rally on Saturday was a rally that they had in September in Terengganu, and that descended into violence. So you can't blame the police for thinking initially that this was going to end up the same way. My
point here being that the tendency to put a ban on opposition voices is much greater than anything else. Now, Khairi's point notwithstanding, let's look at the example of the local newspapers the following morning. The coverage of what happened on Saturday was minimal. The response of the local media was simply to take a government line.
I don't think the papers were taking government line. I read, I told you, I got all my information from the newspapers, and it was widely reported.
We have the papers here, the Sunday Times the next morning.
Yeah.
Instead of responding to what has been the biggest public demonstration in Malaysia for more than 10 years, in which the police felt they had to use water cannon and tear gas, and you've expressed an enormous fear of trouble, the newspapers here have put on page 4, illegal gathering causes traffic chaos in city.
Well, if you think that what the Al Jazeera reported is a true source, then probably it is. But I think they were free to report anything.
The minister says they could have reported anything. Is that true?
Well, obviously the media here is controlled. You have permits which control media houses, and obviously permits are controlled by the government. So I can't necessarily agree with the minister's statement that the media here is free enough to not sit with the government on certain key positions. I can't say for a fact whether or not there was a directive for the media to publish only a limited amount of content about this event, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were to be the case ultimately, if it were found out to be true.
You speak about voices not being heard. Let's go to the core of what Saturday was about. What Saturday was about free and fair elections. If these people have not had their voices heard, then you wouldn't have seen the plethora of changes that have taken place by the Election Commission to make election processes in Malaysia more free and fair. If you look at the changes that have taken place, transparent ballot boxes, indelible ink being used for voters to check that they don't vote twice, trying to tease away from the electoral list people who have passed on and things like that. These are changes. If you're telling me that their voices have not been heard, then surely all these demands have not been acted upon, and they have been acted upon.
Your response?
Well, I think what you have, Saturday is actually, I think, the most important thing about Saturday is that it's a strong sign from civil society that there's a need for institutional reform. And I think civil society is saying that the kind of reforms that have been introduced are not enough.
Let the minister respond to that, please.
Yeah, as I've said, we have a system here. If you have any grouses, our system is that we channel it through the ballot box. And we have elections every 5 years or less. Now, it's difficult for us to say that this is not the best solution. I mean, what's the point of having, you call 50,000, I can call 1 million to come out. Does that mean, I'm right? So this is not our way. I mean, to decide on many issues, I've always said, it's not falling on deaf ears. When you
well, you say it's not falling on deaf ears, but it seems that a lot of the country believe that it is.
Listen, what I'm trying to say is that what you demand is not necessarily right. At the end of the day, we will decide. And at the end of the day, you must never underestimate the will of the people.
Surely the essence, or at least one of the essences of democracy, is the idea that the government listens to the voice of the people. Prime Minister Badawi came into office promising exactly that there would be more response, that there would be more attacks on corruption, there would be more response to the idea that the people have a say in the way the country is governed.
Firstly, I don't think you can use Saturday as a barometer on what the general Malaysian public feels. It was a protest, there were a lot of people there, but to say that is the sum collective of the Malaysian political consciousness, I think it's a stretch.
It is a voice.
I think it's a stretch. It's a voice, but it's a stretch. How loud that voice is, how big that voice is, I'm not quite sure. You can't base it on that. Secondly, I would say that there are a lot of changes afoot. If you talk about election changes, as I've said, the Election Commission has been very responsive. They met with opposition parties, they've taken some of the suggestions like the ballot boxes, postal voters. A lot of changes are happening. If you talk about the media, for the first time, the Prime Minister said in his speech at the UMNO General Assembly last week that in the near future, the media will be able to regulate themselves. Now, this is a marked departure from previous policies to say that you can regulate yourself as opposed to the government regulating the media, and that's something for the future.
Okay. Is there a need for institutional reform in the government?
No. Because, at all? Because, you know, what do you mean by people?
Right.
Are you saying that, you know, I don't represent the people? Are you saying that the government does not represent the people? We are elected by the people. What people are you talking about? And what is democracy? Democracy means listening to the majority. I mean, that's democracy. What else can we do? You can't say that we're not listening to the people because, you know, we represent the people.
Is the fact that people are politically motivated a reason to say, therefore, their views are irrelevant?
You're saying that we are not listening to the people, whereas we represent the people.
I have never said you're not listening to the people.
Yeah, so what do you mean by at the end of the day, there's democracy. And you know democracy means majority of the people will decide. So that's it.
But majority does not mean majoritarianism. And I think the concern is in the push towards appeasing the majority, if that is in fact what is happening here. And I have my doubts because the majority that's being talked about are people in the heartland who do not necessarily understand the issues that are happening here.
So you're saying that people are stupid for electing this government?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if you look at the quality of the information that's being allowed out, we have the Official Secrets Act, which prevents so much information from getting out. We have subjective classification of information by the government. We have the Internal Security Act, which is trundled out every so often to put a chill into the air where it comes to civil society discourse. The fact is people are scared. The fact is people aren't getting information. The fact is I have my doubts personally as to whether a voter is in a position to make a fair and informed choice when he goes to the ballot box. And this is at the heart of the Bersih initiative. Now, I also do not agree with the characterization that Bersih is an opposition initiative because you have about 60 plus NGOs endorsing the initiative.
Who gave the memorandum to the King's representative?
Because we
Who
were
were the
limited,
representatives that marched the gates to give the memorandum? They were opposition leaders. Anwar Ibrahim, Hadi Awang, Lim Kit Siang, clearly led by the opposition.
The opposition is there to voice an opposition view. Is that view irrelevant?
How can they be neutral when they were active participants in the last general elections? So it cannot be neutral to me.
Exactly. If you're saying that these are middle-of-the-road Malaysians with genuine concerns, then I would have expected 80% of those present would have been people who had absolutely no political affiliations.
And perhaps
but that
if they
wasn't
hadn't
the case.
turned around cars at the roadblocks and if they hadn't restricted access into the city, we may have seen a bigger representation. But the point is, if you look at the Bersih website and the press statements that Bersih has issued, it appears that there was supposed to be a bigger delegation, but because the situation was controlled, ultimately a limited number of people were allowed into the precinct of the palace, or to the gates of the palace to hand over this memorandum. I don't think it's fair to say that because the persons who ultimately went to the fore were opposition members, this is not a civil society initiative, because at the end of the day, civil society also comprises agencies or organizations which are linked to the government parties or the opposition. So if UMNO was involved, that would also be a civil society initiative.
Let me just get a statement from you I just want to tie up what you were suggesting earlier on. Is it your view that there is no need at all for institutional reform in Malaysia, that there are no questions to be asked about the cleanliness, if you like, of electoral process, that there are no corruption issues to be addressed, that the institutional reforms that are being asked for by both the opposition and various civil society groups are of no significance here at all, that they carry no weight?
They carry no weight. Yes, I don't think there's any need for institutional reform because the system has worked well for the last 50 years. You only hear grouser from people, you know, who participated in the system and lost. And but I can argue further if India say that people are stupid to put us in government.
Where there is an opposition voice, and you may choose to characterize it as small, you may choose to characterize it as partisan or even crazy, as some people have done in Parliament, where the voice is not even being listened to, even its legitimacy, as we've heard from the Minister, is being entirely written off. Is there a future for a democratic debate under those circumstances?
No, I don't think they're not being listened to, and I don't think it's fair to
The Minister has just stated there is no validity to any of the demands being made by the opposition.
No, he's saying that there's no need for systemic institutional changes because we believe the institutions and the system is fine. There's nothing wrong with the system and the institution.
So
process,
let me put that to you again. Is there validity to some of the demands being made?
Pardon?
Is there any validity to some of the demands and some of the accusations being made about the system?
Well, to improve the system, yes, but to say that, you know, the system was unfair and was not free, I think that's not the correct description. To improve, yes.
Well, I'm grateful for the concession from the Minister because obviously there is room for improvement. And I think if you want to argue over whether it's an improvement or a systemic change, then we're going to semantics. The fact is there are flaws, serious flaws, which some of us believe are undermining the democratic process of this country. We'll start with the fact that, you know, if you pick up a newspaper, generally you do not hear what the opposition has to say about anything. You do not know what the opposition platform is unless you have internet access. Internet penetration is minimal. You're not getting into the heartland. I didn't say that they were stupid. I didn't say voters were stupid. I said that they were maybe underinformed or ill-informed or given positions which do not allow them to make free and fair choices in the way that the constitution of this country seems to contemplate. The fact is, why would the Constitution create an election commission as a separate constitutional body, charge the Agung with appointing persons onto the commission who have the confidence of the people?
That's a kind of level of detail, I think, that is beyond this conversation. But, Kari, I just want you to finish with one final comment from you, and please, a very short one, if you would.
Okay.
As a representative of the younger generation of the UMNO party, do you agree with what the Minister said, or do you think there is room for change within the institutional structure?
I agree with what the Minister said. There's nothing wrong with the system.
And so there is no need for any change.
There needs to be some changes to the processes to strengthen it. But the institutions are fine. The system works. And we lose in elections. We've lost in Kelantan, we've lost before.
And that's a good place to leave the discussion. Gentlemen, thank you all very much indeed. That's all we have time for this edition of 101 East. Until next time, goodbye.